Well, COP21 was an amazing success by the world, but also by the French who organised it so well. We got a global deal, we got a review process, we got a commitment to 2 degrees warming at the most and hopefully 1.5 degrees. We got a commitment to climate finance. There were words around a whole lot of other issues, technology, loss and damage and so on. So there are lots of reasons to be optimistic, but with all these things, the glass is half full, but it's also half empty, because if you add up all the voluntary contributions that countries made, we're still only about a quarter to a third of the way towards the reductions that are needed by 2030. So what everybody is saying is, this is the departure station, not the arrival station, and the real work begins not just to deliver the INDCs, but also to deliver the further cuts that are come. And if you think that the INDCs might be just the low-hanging fruit, there will be some very difficult decisions to take, and I think that's where the big winners and losers will be seen. In economics, we all know the work of Joseph Schumpeter, who talked about creative destruction as the driver of progress. So there will be creation, people working in the solar industry, in wind power, in the new sector industries, but there will also be losers in the old industries, and the big task of government is to make sure that the losers are not just abandoned, but are kept on the boat as it sails along. Well, I think the SDGs is a wonderfully broad and ambitious statement about where we want the world to be in 2030. There should be no poverty, there should be good health for everybody, there should be good education, there should be human rights, rule of law, democracy for all, there should be clean oceans, there should be protected forests, and there should be sustainable production and consumption. Now, the difficult question about the SDGs is, can you achieve all of those at the same time, or will there be some choices to make? And for example, I think it's quite clear that developing countries need to grow in order to reduce poverty. And there is a commitment, rather surprisingly, in the SDG framework to growth. So is it possible for us to continue to grow at quite high rates in order to reduce poverty, but at the same time to achieve sustainable production and consumption? And is there an alternative? Well, one alternative is we perhaps need to think about consuming less, or growing consumption less, in the richer countries so that it can grow more in the poorer countries. And I'm sure that we will make huge strides in the future in sustainable production methods and consumption methods, but we'll also have to think about how we manage our consumption. And for example, I'm trying to eat less meat. Because when you look at the carbon load of intensively farmed meat, it's very high compared to eating a vegetarian diet. So it's not easy, but I think many people have said we should try to cut the amount of meat we eat, and that would help the planet. Probably we should, those of us in rich countries, drive less and travel less, and perhaps fly less in order to save the planet. And these will be quite difficult decisions for people. Well, what we want to happen with climate finance is that there is enough public money available really to stimulate the huge amounts of private finance that will be available. And we're talking about the $100 billion that was originally promised and is supposed to now become the floor after 2020. 100 billion actually is not much money when we're talking about hundreds of billions being spent on renewable energy. Then add all the adaptation costs and the trillions of investment that will take place over the coming 20 or 30 years. So what we have to do is to use the public money very carefully to reduce the risk, to help innovation in technology, to provide mixed, blended finance between loans and grants for help people, to perhaps have more green bonds if we need new ways of raising money from the private sector. So, there are lots of options available for climate finance, but the big mistake, I think, is to think that the problem will be solved by a source of funds we label climate finance, because dealing with climate change especially if we're going to get to the target we need for 2030, is going to take the whole economy. So it's not just the budget in the government account, which is labelled climate, that we need to worry about. It's all of government spending and actually all of private sector spending as well. So we need a good regulatory framework, and we need a good green government budget overall in all countries. Climate finance is really the first step on a big transformation of the way in which we raise taxes. For example, should we reduce fuel subsidies? Should we tax waste? Should we make pollution much more expensive for private companies? Should we help people to charge more for energy domestically so people don't use energy, but perhaps compensate them so that they're not actually worse off? You know, there are all sorts of adjustments to the tax system that will be needed. First of all, the right policy in place and the right implementation depends a lot on three things. First of all, there has to be leadership, there has to be public support, and both of those need to be informed by good ideas. And the good ideas often come and are disseminated by think tanks in all countries around the world. And so an organization like CPD in Bangladesh, the Centre for Policy Dialogue, has a really important role as, if you like, the platform and the intermediary for making these ideas about the impact of climate change more visible. In the organisation I work most closely with, the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, we've developed this principle of climate-compatible development, and we are working with many think tanks around the world to explore what this means. And if we don't have think tanks in the world, I suspect it will be much more difficult to make the case.